That might have been Honey and Buzz's first public shout-out. So they're very proud. I am so happy to be here with all of you this morning. Can you hear me all right in this microphone?
Closer.
Alter the angle. Better? Okay. So modern movements for social change are often so tied to the internet that it's easy to forget that we're part of a real flesh and blood community. So I am extremely pleased to see your real faces really in front of me right now. Weekends like this always remind me of my first family reunion, where I walk in and I don't know anybody, but I can kind of see myself in all your faces. So I'm really happy to be here this morning with my family. So really glad that all of you turned out, and thank you all again for attending and organizing this great conference. Now, as Liz just said, my name is Derrick Crowe. I'm the political director at Brave New Foundation, and I run the day-to-day Rethink Afghanistan project. And I understand that some of you saw the documentary last week, and we really appreciate you sharing that information with your family and friends. The theme for our time together is Bring Our Billions Home. And surely, after so many years, it's time to do so. Our nation is twisting in the grip of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. I think we all know that. About 9.5% of all Americans are unemployed. Here in the Spokane metropolitan area, that number is 10.5%. 7.5 million Americans lost their job in this Great Recession. People are falling out of the middle class in record numbers. In fact, according to a recent CBS News report, the child poverty rate in the United States may hit 25% this year. To say that times are tough would be a gross understatement. Yet at a time when so many Americans struggle to find the money to feed themselves or to keep their homes, our government plans to spend more than $107 billion just on the Afghanistan war just this year. Now, we hear these huge numbers about the economy and about war spending all the time, so I thought it would be helpful to focus in just on one family's struggle in this Great Recession over this past year, and to set it next to the experience of our country in the Afghanistan war, so that we could see what we're getting and what we're not getting for our money. The family I want to focus on is the Corfey family from Seminole County, Florida, who was featured in a recent 60 Minutes report entitled The Hard Times Generation. At the start of last year, David and Teresa Corfey and their kids lived in a 3-bedroom home, supported by a $40 an hour wage David and Teresa made detailing expensive cars. Now, when the Great Recession hit, both lost their jobs, and eventually they lost their home. David and Teresa and their daughter Destiny and their sons George and Chance moved into their van, parked in a Walmart parking lot. They bathed in the Walmart restroom. Destiny said she was afraid her friends would see her there. She said, "It was kind of weird, but we went through it." And now they live in a hotel, week by week, in a rough neighborhood that regularly makes the local news due to the high crime rate. All of their possessions went into a storage unit that couldn't fit into that hotel room. Eventually, they couldn't pay that bill either, and the facility seized and sold their goods in lieu of payment. Those goods included the kids' scooter, all of their games, most of their clothes, Destiny's dolls, and all the family photos. Gone. Now, David Corfey eventually made a sign to stand on a street corner when the money ran out. "Family of 5, please help." From $40 an hour in a 3-bedroom home to holding a sign, "Family of 5, please help," on a street corner. Destiny said, with her father sitting there, that she was ashamed and didn't want people to know that he was her dad. Eventually, David did find work as a parking attendant for $10 an hour to support a family of 5. George dropped out of high school his senior year to go to work to try to help the family. Just on Highway 192 in Florida, which leads to the happiest place on earth near where the Corfeys live, Disney World, right? 67 motels house about 500 homeless kids living there week to week. In fact, the local school bus routes now regularly make the routes to the cheap hotels in the area because so many children live there. One of the local schools, Castleberry, let CBS News interview some of the kids. And one of the kids described the new experience he has of going to bed hungry. He said, quote, "It's like hard. You can see, you can just like wait, and you just go to sleep for 5 minutes, and you wake up and you say to yourself, I'm gonna go to sleep, I'm gonna go to sleep. But you can't because your stomach's hurting and because it doesn't have any food in it." One little girl cried when she described the shame she felt when her family had to take food from a local church. "It's hard because my grandmother is also out of work, and we usually get some food from her," she said. One little girl, Ashley Ray, said she feels like it's her fault that her family doesn't have enough money. Her fault. Now, by some strange coincidence, when she was being interviewed by 60 Minutes, Destiny Corfey was wearing a shirt covered in peace symbols. It was one of the last shirts she had that didn't get sold by the storage unit. She wasn't the only kid wearing the peace symbols in the segment either. Homeless children learning to live in vans and motels, to brush their teeth in the Walmart bathroom, learning to be ashamed of their parents when the very last of the money runs out, learning to think it's their fault, that the crumbling of our communities is their fault, while their government wastes the wealth of a nation on a brutal, feudal war in Afghanistan and other places around the world. And they think it's their fault. Now, during this last year, when Destiny Corfey and her family were in the agonizing slide from their 3-bedroom house to the Walmart parking lot and the grimy bathroom where they had to brush their teeth, their government has been very busy. Starting with an announcement at West Point in December 2009, President Obama sent 30,000 more troops, the second major escalation of his presidency, to a faltering war in Afghanistan, and tens of thousands of for-profit contractors to support them. As policymakers always do, they wrap this move in a mix of humanitarian rhetoric and an appeal to your naked self-interest. We were given assurances that these new troops would protect the population of Afghanistan from insurgent intimidation and violence, that it would allow them to support a legitimate government taking root without fear of reprisal or intimidation. This would deny the Taliban their recruitment pool and their room to operate. These troops, they said, would allow the U.S. to reverse the momentum of the insurgency. Doing so would protect the rights of women and protect them from the ugly oppression of the Taliban. And ultimately, this massive escalation of the war effort, again, the second major escalation of the Obama presidency, was to lead to an increase in American security. All of these assurances, every single one, proved to be false. Every single one. Now it appears that our nation's about to launch another military action against the nation of Libya. So before I move on, it's worth a brief detour to remember how the idea of airstrikes was used in the warmongering for the Afghanistan conflict. War industry rhetoric and the showmanship of the military during the first Gulf War has left the image of the smart bomb stamped in the minds of most Americans. These smart bombs supposedly hit their targets with pinpoint accuracy, reducing or eliminating even civilian casualties when we drop them in areas where there's a mix of military and civilian targets. Within my own faith tradition, smart bomb hype led the Society of Christian Ethicists to declare that America's military technology enabled such deadly accuracy that the punitive expedition to punish the Taliban could be accomplished with minimal civilian casualties, and as such, they proposed that the assault on Afghanistan fit with the Christian just war tradition. This declaration was used within the Christian community to silence debate and tar anti-war believers as unbiblical shirkers and apologists for terrorists. Yet, when the time came to sell the American people on the idea of major troop increases after the war effort soured in Afghanistan in 2009, the humanitarians at the Pentagon pointed to statistics that showed that the overwhelming majority of U.S.-caused civilian casualties in Afghanistan were caused by airstrikes, and that the massive troop increases were being sold as a way to bring down casualty numbers caused by the very weapon systems used to sell the American people on the idea of a humanitarian war. That's worth remembering this week, because your elected officials are working really hard to sell you on the idea of a humanitarian no-fly zone supported by U.S. airstrikes in Libya. Now, this pattern of broken promises repeated itself across the board with respect to the assurances given to the American people about the results of a troop increase in Afghanistan. One of the primary promises that was given was that more troops would let us protect the population of Afghanistan, not just from our own munitions, but from insurgent violence and intimidation. That would give them space to throw their support behind the Kabul government. This promise turned out to be a cruel joke, as I think all of us know. This past year, as U.S. troop levels peaked, levels of violence in Afghanistan hit new heights, leading to record numbers of civilian casualties in Afghanistan. In fact, every single year of the Afghanistan conflict, we've increased troops. And every single year, at best, they failed to prevent an increase in civilian casualties. Some troops reported that as they moved into new areas, they dragged the war with them, with the ever-present improvised explosive devices, IEDs, following them wherever they went, killing civilians in new places, generating outrage and coalition impotence after security promises have been given to the local population. And neither have women's rights been protected by U.S. policies in Afghanistan. Yes, it's true more girls are in school, and women have guaranteed seats in the parliament. But many women's groups describe these changes as cosmetic when set against the wider picture of the situation for women in Afghanistan. What's being portrayed as a uniquely vile aspect of Taliban rule is actually a deeply entrenched cultural sickness across rural Afghanistan, whether the Taliban's there or not. Self-immolation, one of the few escapes for women in rural Afghanistan, is actually at an all-time high this year. Afghanistan reporter Anand Gopal, one of my friends and one of the few Afghan journalists in Afghanistan, that can move around at all in the country, reports that in the rural south of the country, women still suffer under virtually the same rigid social codes as they did under the Taliban. Only nowadays they have the privilege of dodging bullets and bombs as our war encircles their otherwise undisturbed misery. Truth be told, women's rights was never a true policy priority for U.S. activities in Afghanistan, although it certainly was a public relations priority. If you recall, a year ago, a leaked CIA Red Cell assessment suggested that using Afghan women as messengers and symbols would help shore up flagging support for the war in Western countries. And like clockwork, Time magazine ran a cover of a woman whose face had been disfigured by her family next to the words, "What happens if we leave Afghanistan?" Now the title could just as easily have been, "What happens while we're in Afghanistan?" since the attack on Bibi Aisha took place with massive numbers of U.S. troops in the country, and a subsequent investigation revealed that she was attacked by members of her own family and not by members of the Taliban. Now, to their credit, Time magazine also recently named a fierce and determined woman named Malalai Joya one of their most influential people in the world, although the article describing her work openly attacked her point of view. You see, Malalai was once a female member of parliament in Afghanistan, and she was an outspoken opponent of the misogynist warlords empowered by U.S. policy there. Her principled defense of the rights of women and her refusal to be silenced by human rights abusers led to serious threats against her life. She speaks out truthfully and forcefully against U.S. policy in Afghanistan because, in truth, many of the people in power put there by us are every bit as vicious and anti-woman as the worst mullah in the Taliban. This month, Malalai was scheduled to travel here to the United States to talk about her book and her experience as a woman among warlords. The U.S. State Department, however, just denied her visa request. They told her they couldn't let her in because she lives underground and is unemployed. When she attempted to explain that she has to live on the run because of the threats on her life due to her work on behalf of Afghan women, the state official cut her off and said, "Don't worry, we know exactly who you are. We know everything about you." And they denied her request. During this past year, troop increases have not only failed to stop Taliban momentum across the country, it's also failed to find and support a legitimate local partner, a partnership that would be necessary for success according to the U.S. military's own strategy manual for the doctrine being used in Afghanistan. So corrupt are our supposed allies in Kabul that the U.S. taxpayer is about to be on the hook for a bank bailout for Hamid Karzai's brother's bank, which power holders in Afghanistan have treated like a private piggy bank, using depositors' money to buy palatial homes on an artificial island off the coast of off of Dubai called Palm Jumeirah, created in the shape of a palm tree in the water. They're handed out like candy to the political cronies of Hamid Karzai's government. Now that bank is in danger of collapse due to the Karzai cartel's massive control fraud scheme. Most inconveniently, that's the same bank that handles the payroll for the Afghan civil service and the Afghan national security forces. Its inability to pay out depositors has already caused unrest across the country and could leave lots of people with lots of guns with no paycheck from the government that we're backing. There is no way U.S. policy in Afghanistan can withstand the failure of that bank. So guess who's about to bail them out? You are, to the tune of almost $500 million, to the tune of almost a full $1 billion. Your government swears none of your money is going to be used for this. But that, frankly, appears to be a bald-faced lie, because Afghanistan has almost no money that doesn't originate within international donor hands. And most of that money comes from us. And the rest of it is almost all contingent on them cleaning up that bank. You're about to bail that bank out. This unmitigated disaster in Afghanistan cost the U.S. taxpayer an excess of $2 billion every week. Put another way, we're paying $1 million per soldier per year. All told, when spending approved so far by Congress is accounted for, just the direct cost for the Afghanistan war is going to cost us $500 billion just so far. That's not counting care for veterans or the social costs of their injuries. Now, to put this horrendous waste in context a little bit, right here in the city of Spokane, an article on the city of Spokane's public website says that to close a $12 million shortfall in the general fund, the city in which we meet today has made what they call drastic reductions in the portion of the budget that pays for basic government services, including police, fire, streets, parks, libraries. These cuts ended 120 jobs in a city with a 10.5% unemployment rate, well above the national average. Yet on average, the Afghanistan war cost the taxpayers just of this city roughly twice that shortfall every year. And the same is true in communities across the country that are about to be forced to make draconian cuts to their public services. Back in Seminole County, where Destiny Corfey and her family are homeless, living in a hotel and scraping by on a $10 an hour income for 5 people, the Afghanistan war cost local taxpayers $817 million so far. In Wisconsin, where Governor Walker used a phony plan to save the state $300 million as a way of attacking collective bargaining rights, bringing home a pitiful 150 troops, not even 1% of the Americans over there, just for 2 years, would save more than Walker's original plan. Bring our billions home? Hell yes, bring our billions home. You up quite a bit just now, right? And I don't want to beat up on my family, so I'm going to leave you with a little bit of good news here. I know it's a little jarring after all that. The good news is, whether you know it or not, you are winning. Now, it may not feel like it after that speech I just gave. And it may not feel like it when President Obama is talking about possibly 4 more years of futile, brutal war and combat operations in Afghanistan. But the anti-war movement, as strange as it sounds, is winning. We just don't know it yet. Here's my proof. I hear you laughing back there. Part of the problem is, and some of the workshops this weekend are going to address this, is that our movement doesn't have a very good understanding about the way social movements progress through their life cycle, and they grow and they evolve. So we buy into these narratives of failure and irrelevance, like this one that I've helpfully got from the Politico from September 4th, 2010. Quote, paradoxically, the anti-war movement has grown weaker as public opposition to the Afghanistan war has grown stronger. A recent Gallup poll found that 43% of those surveyed, at the time it's much higher now, think that the Afghanistan war was a mistake, compared with 30% in January 2009. See how that's growing over time? But an anti-war rally in Washington back in March 2009, that's Washington, D.C. They never mean anything but Washington, D.C. drew only 10,000 people, a fraction of the 500,000 activists who attended an anti-Iraq war rally in Manhattan in 2003. Now there's a conflation here I want you to notice. The conflation is putting together one aspect of a social movement, which is attendance at rallies and protests, with the entire movement. And that conflation is very common. That's why even leading anti-war personalities can be fully aware of growing massive public opposition to the war, but still say things like this. And I'm not going to name them in case you know them. They're not in the room, don't worry. Quote, we don't have a very vibrant anti-war movement anymore, end quote. Or, quote, I think basically it's over, end quote. They should have attended this conference. Now, it's a common idea among those of us who consider ourselves activists that a lack of attendance at huge rallies or marches or mass demonstrations equals a dead movement. And thankfully, that's dead wrong. The author of the Politico article unwittingly described a social movement that is succeeding and has outgrown a particular stage of its life and moved on to a much more powerful incarnation. Now, if any of you have read Bill Moyer's 2001 book on social movements doing democracy, you'll know that huge rallies and marches and other demonstrations are key aspects of a growing social movement, but they are expected to fade away as movement progresses through the various stages of its life towards success. It's expected. If we look at the movement through the lens of Moyer's model of social movements, it's clear that not only is the Afghanistan war, the movement to end the Afghanistan war, it's clear that that movement isn't not just fading away, but we're winning. A solid majority of Americans now oppose the war. Most Americans think we shouldn't even be involved there anymore. Most think it's a lost cause. Most want troop withdrawals to begin on or before July 2011. And most likely voters, get this, most likely voters want all troops out of Afghanistan within a year. Yeah. Likely voters. Yeah. Right? And serious alternatives to the current policy are being proposed. The Council on Foreign Relations even, the thermometer of very serious thinking in Washington, D.C., has proposed rapid troop withdrawals if progress isn't being made. And guess what? It isn't. The Afghanistan Study Group proposed a significant reduction beginning next year. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace proposed its own withdrawal plans. And of course, anti-Afghanistan war activists have been calling for withdrawals on a much faster timeline for months now. All of this has contributed to a drastically altered national conversation about the war, which now focuses almost entirely on how and when we withdraw our troops, and not if. Think about the change dynamic just between this year and last year. At this time last year, the public opposed the Afghanistan war, but President Obama decided to push ahead with the troop increase. And he briefly turned public opinion around with his speech at West Point. However, this president, who campaigned on escalating the war, was compelled by public opposition into providing a concession. In 18 months, our troops will begin to come home. War supporters worked mightily to redefine that concession into meaninglessness. And after McChrystal resigned in disgrace last year, General Petraeus worked to try to convince the American people that we were making progress. He went on a media tour. I'm sure you caught some of the appearances on your TV. You had to have, because he was on every channel. He failed spectacularly. Public opposition remained solidly in opposition to the war after that media tour. President Obama has failed himself to turn the public opinion around on this issue. And yet, even though his rhetoric continues to talk about making progress and the need to finish the job, somehow the option of sending another major troop surge is off the table. Even though Pentagon officials have testified to Congress repeatedly that there's no troop cap that exists. That didn't just magically happen. War supporters don't just give up on their favorite tool, which is troop increases. The political environment shaped by the work of anti-war activists did that. You did that, and you should be proud of it. Now, President Obama and his administration will likely never say anything like the following quote: "Man, you anti-war activists really shut me down. Good job. We're going to end combat operations because I can't sustain political support if I keep pushing these policies in opposition to you." He'll say something more like this: "Thanks to the outstanding performance of our troops and General David Petraeus, our assessment shows that we're making sufficient progress to begin withdrawing troops by July 2011, if not before, and we'll end combat operations by insert date here." We'll do everything we can as a movement to push that end date forward in time. And the generals and the pro-war politicians will do everything they can to roll it back. But in the end, we're going to end this war. The president's going to do his best to save face. The media will, as always, comply and convey the power holders' narrative. But you and I are going to tell our grandkids how we ended the Afghanistan war this year.
Right. Yeah.
Most people agree that the Afghanistan war isn't making us safer, and it's not worth the cost. The national conversation has shifted onto a playing field that is enormously advantageous to those of us in the movement to end the war. Further major troop increases are off the table. This is no time to get complacent. We're in a critical period, but it's absolutely not a time for despair either. It's a time for hope. So take care of yourselves, keep your eye on the prize, and keep up the fight, because in the struggle to bring our billions home, it is much later than you think. Thank you.